Hey friends, welcome to season 4, episode 2 of Pen, Picture, and Chat. Today with us we have a writer. MV Perry is the name on the book, but I'm just going to call you Matt during the interview.
Sounds good.
Welcome, Matt.
you.
It's so good to have you.
Yeah.
How are you doing today?
I got some nerves. I've never done something like this before, but we'll try to chill out.
Yeah, it's going to be super awesome.
Yeah.
So I just guess the first question that I have for you is what is it like being a writer in Chicago?
Well, for one, I don't do much writing. Right now, I re-released this book in August, and only this year have really made a concerted effort to take part in community events in the city. So while I'm not writing, I am doing a lot of book stuff. I try to go to at least 2 or 3 events per week, be it book clubs or author talks or just anything in the ballpark to see and be seen, and also support other people's work around the city, because I figure that's the best way for them to support you.
Yeah. Do you have a lot of relationships with other authors in the city?
No.
No?
I mean, I've met a couple just by getting out there in the last couple months, but no, in no meaningful way do I partake in an artistic community.
Yeah.
Which I think is probably how a lot of novelists are. It's maybe the most solitary of forms. I don't know.
Yeah. Is that a draw for you, or is that something that you like, or is that something that you would want to, would you seek out maybe getting to know other authors more?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think I was just personally reluctant to embrace any kind of artsy label. I kept it to myself. I don't even know why, but I love talking about the fine print of writing and novels and all of that stuff. And I learn a lot from other people. I was in an Evanston writers book group for a hot second, and these were people who mostly did what's called genre fiction. I do literary fiction, which is supposed to be big and serious and have ideas. Genre fiction would be fantasy, sci-fi, historical, and supposedly doesn't have big, serious ideas, which is nonsense. But I loved working with them, and I learned a lot because there's just a lot about the craft that they think about and do that I don't. Really basic stuff building tension and release and having a good hook and having a good cliffhanger and just writing in a way that's almost as entertaining as following a TV show. You want to keep coming back to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you even get into writing? How did that process happen for you?
I kind of always had a knack for it, I guess, but like I said, didn't embrace it. I was really bookish for a while, still am, but I guess prior to writing, I had a lot going through my head about mental illness in society, and really would have liked to have been an advocate and make a really strong case for the type of things that I talk about in this book. And just one day it kind of clicked that all my research and work could be put into something like this, and it just felt really right. And I went home that night and started writing, and for 3 or 4 months straight, from late 2015 to early 2016, I completed the first draft. And for the next 5 years, 6 months on, 6 months off, I would rewrite it until until I was far enough away from who I was at the beginning where it would be dishonest to keep editing it, because you'd just be putting new standards onto a time and place where those didn't apply.
So how do you? So it's a long process.
Yeah.
How do you stay with it? How do you have that sort of commitment to be this is a thing that I'm creating and I intend on staying with it? I can't stay to do as I can't finish washing the dishes, how do you do that?
I mean, I was actively mentally ill while I did this. So there's a lot of delusions of grandeur and a sense that there were really serious stakes to this, or that it was something that I really needed to get out there for myself, and thought that maybe it could, latch on to larger audiences in ways that were really personally important to them. That makes it sound like a propaganda piece, which it kind of is. And for the sake of, popular messaging, this is as long as Moby Dick. And it's very heavy and it's kind of complex. And like I said, it's about mental illness, and it's written while actively mentally ill. And it goes on like that for 500 pages. It's not going to be for everybody. However, yeah, that's where we're at.
Yeah. So if people are watching right now, and they're curious about like what is in there, what would you tell people if they're curious about reading it?
Sure. So I'm still working on the elevator pitch. For starters, I do believe that like the next big social frontier in America is some kind of movement to end the neglect of mental illness. And so the main purpose of this book is both to compel readers in that direction and also to offer like as much information and food for thought as possible for them to stew on it and, you know, think out, well, what do they think of it? Well, anyways, yeah. Around that time, there was like a lot going on socially and politically in Chicago and in Illinois, and at the federal level that really offered a pretty like interesting snapshot about how mental illness worked its way into things that people were already experiencing and talking about, but didn't have that same ready-hand analysis for it. So for instance, like Rahm Emanuel had just closed 6 mental health clinics in the city, largely South and West Side. And at the time, that was half of the clinics that were left. And I think at its peak, Chicago had a few dozen. But anyways, over the last few decades, there's just been a general disinvestment from the community mental health system to the point where like there really isn't one at all. So there was like a community movement that formed out of Woodlawn that actually did a pretty good job of making like a narrative of that and making an issue. I think it actually ended up being one of the things that really stuck to Rahm and made people think he was a pain in the ass. But that offered like a lot of food for thought about like, you know, city issues and certainly about city politics and segregation. And, you know, the first round of Black Lives Matter was also happening at that time. I think the Laquan McDonald video had just been released. And, you know, the crossroads of all of those issues of abusive or corrupt policing and also of, you know, mass incarceration. Mental illness is very, very heavily implicated there. You know, people say Cook County Jail, along with Rikers Island and LA County, are the nation's largest mental health treatment centers, which is exactly where we were in like the 1800s. Like that was the exact issue that gave rise to the asylums. And yeah, it's really unnerving to think that we're kind of having that same debate with that same issue. So anyways, that's on one level. At the state level, Bruce Rauner had become governor, and the state of Illinois had failed to pass a budget for, I think they went on like 2 years there. I can't remember, but it was a while. And in the meantime, there was, you know, funding being hauled, or what am I looking for? Stalled everywhere. And there's this really great sense of insecurity amongst, you know, people in the mental health system and disability services more generally. Because just like at the city level, like the community mental health system in Illinois had already been cut down to nothing. And like, you know, what is another 70, 80 million going to do? Like you're already in shambles. You're just literally putting it to extinction at that point. And so what you saw was just this moment of crisis where you get, you know, two political parties with competing views of what the political economy of the state of Illinois should be, just basically using mental health and mental health consumers as a pawn in their games. You know, Rauner kind of saying like, you know, either you give into our demands for this type of taxation or for pension reform, or we're going to keep cutting, you know, disability services down to nothing. And then on the other hand, you've got Madigan who says, well, actually, we're not going to do that, and you have to vote for us. Otherwise, that's going to happen to you. But there's no real agency in it. I mean, they're strictly just moral pawns to be tossed around in this bigger fight about business and government and all that. And so that allowed for a lot of food for thought there. And then at the federal level, there was this guy, Tim Murphy, out of Pennsylvania, who had twice introduced federal legislation about mental health. It was initially introduced after Newton, a lot of people, the only time mental illness really becomes sexy as an issue is unfortunately after violence. And granted, mental illness is falsely conflated with, mass shootings. Nonetheless, the idea that it holds a lot of social power, particularly for people who have a very retrograde understanding of mental illness and who want to bring back the standards of old psychiatry, namely through more institutions and through revoking laws that protect patients' rights and patients' civil liberties. And so that's like half the book. And, a lot of it kind of reads like dry nonfiction. That's kind of more like, maybe like a social studies type analysis. But it's all stuff that I think should be out there and should be consumed and thought about and discussed. Because I don't think that our current discussions on mental illness are like engaging with the type of stuff I'm putting out in here. And then the other half of the book is just a personal account of mental illness. It's just and probably substance abuse and addiction too. But yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you would maybe say that the book is it's a very political book. Is that true?
I avoid politics now, but I put myself in it.
But there's some.
There's a lot of politics in it. Yeah.
What do you want the book to do? Like if somebody reads it, what do you want? Is there an action that you want someone to take? Like what do you want to happen when someone reads the book?
It's a good question. At the time, I was working on a grant to organize like mental health consumers for advocacy. And I think the wildest dream would have been that organization would have built up at the same time as this book became something. And then I could answer that question where it says, well, actually, we have a bona fide base of people and a bona fide base of support to actually go into places like Springfield and say, hey, we're going to do this. Mm-hmm. I don't have shit in the way of that, at least right now. So I can't tell them to do anything. Yeah. This is now strictly like, art to read and art to think about. Mm-hmm. It would be nice to keep moving in that general direction. I just don't have anything to stand on right now. But I do community events. I'll be at Sketchbook Brewing on Sunday the 21st at 2 p.m. And, right now, 90% of Americans say that we're living in a mental health crisis, but they're also at a loss for words as to what that really means or how to talk about it themselves. And so simply getting community dialogue and getting a room full of people who want to talk about this, like maybe for the first time in like human history, is like awesome. It's great. And simply having that much is like a good enough action item for me for now.
So what would you say is the next step for you? You have the book, you're doing these community events. Is there like another goal that you have, like something that you want to do to kind of either further the consumer base for the book, or what's next, I guess?
Just keep getting out there.
Yeah.
Keep engaging with readers, keep getting readers. They say the audience completes the art. Mm-hmm. And so all the years of writing are meaningless if it's just sitting there. And so this is a whole new venture of actually getting that audience. Because I did try to go through traditional channels and get an agent. Tried that for like 3 years. I got full manuscript requests from a few of them, which is basically like the first step after a query. Like they read, the whole thing or maybe part of it, decide whether they're going to take it. And it turns out they didn't. And so I decided to retreat from that and just focus on like grassroots growth. Mm-hmm. And so I self-published. I formed an LLC to do that. I've got like 500 copies sitting in my apartment. The book is 99 cents on Amazon Kindle. And I'm very deliberate about getting myself out there, seeing and being seen, engaging, and seeing what comes from that.
That's also intentional.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So grassroots publishing, going to bookstores, what does that look like? What is that process? How do you approach people and say, hey, I have this book, people need to read it?
Yeah.
How do you get it out there?
So the first time around, I just pretty much email blasted so many different booksellers. Like at one point, I had like an Excel sheet of like the 50 largest cities in America and like every bookstore that was like in there, and they all got some kind of message from me. And locally, I would go to bookstores. I was living in Cleveland, Ohio at the time, and would just kind of go in, have a note, and give them a copy and see if they would take it. Uh, and what I learned from that is like booksellers are kind of tough cookies, and with good reason. I think a lot of people forget that like Amazon started as a bookseller, and so their whole goal is to be the everything store where everything is available to you for the lowest price possible. And I mean, really, like booksellers have been in the longest battle with them. It's kind of amazing that they're still there. I mean, Amazon took out Borders, and Amazon took out, or they're starting to take out Barnes and Nobles. There's still a few around, but they're like less and less.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's all to say. Like the mom and pops have to be pretty damn scrupulous about what they put on their shelves, and I understand that, and I understand that it's very easy for someone to just walk in not knowing them and say like, hey, I got this book, maybe you'll consider taking it. They probably got a gazillion of those people, and they don't necessarily have like the profit margins to like just get away with taking anyone. So yeah, in line with the grassroots, like if I can't support them, why would they support me? So I'm only in a couple bookstores right now. The bookseller in Lincoln Square has it on their shelf. Bookends and Beginnings in Evanston does, in conjunction with the sketchbook event. But otherwise, I'm just really taking it slow.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to their book clubs. I'm, being a part of their community there. I'm supporting their events. And only after doing that X amount of times would I be like, by the way, I'm an author here too. Would you consider that? Because I just consider that altogether the better basis to be an author.
Yeah. So the book is like a Chicago book, would you say? It's all about Chicago and Chicagoland and the sort of mental health scene and politics of being a Chicagoan. What's the perspective of the book? Like who is, I know it's like your thoughts, but I guess what's that look like?
So I'm actually not from Chicago, and Chicagoans will draw a hard line on this. I'm from the North Shore. So, I mean, the suburbs do have a relationship to the city because that's what they define themselves by. But it is actually maybe in a lot of ways closer to the mold of like Ordinary People, which was filmed up in Lake Forest. I'm from Winnetka. That feels like a sad disclosure around here. People do care. They do care.
I imagine, but it's okay.
But yeah, no, it is actually like it's a wealthy individual dealing with their own mental illness and the relationship of privilege to the rest of the city. Because for them, having severe mental illness and living them that way introduces them to experiences of like neglect and just contempt that don't usually latch onto an experience of privilege, and so they find themselves identifying more and more with the type of thinking that's coming from places outside of Winnetka, namely from like African American thought. So that's the perspective of the person. I don't know what more to go from there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you have to do a lot of research, or is it mostly just your own accounts? A lot of research.
A lot of research, yeah.
Yeah. What did that look like?
I was just I had a lot of fear as a writer because I did want there is kind of an argument to this. I'm not doctrinaire about it. You can disagree with it. But it is political, and there is something to say and a case to be made. And if you want to do that seriously, people can be pretty damn rigid. Like if there's even one thing wrong, or if even one social conflict that can't be defended, you're shot down, you're ignorant, you're canceled, you're any kind of misogynistic, racist, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, I did a lot of research. I wanted everything that was in there to be defensible on some ethical ground and in some reality-based ground. And I would never do anything like that again. And now it seems totally delusional because all of like 200 people have probably read it, and very few of them are actually going to take that rigid of a stance.
Yeah.
But that was my perception of like art at that time between like 2015 and 2018. I still don't know if I'm being oversensitive or if that's like legitimately like the climate that like rookie millennial authors were coming into. I think it probably was legitimately the climate. but
I believe
no.
it. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even, but also like I haven't paid attention to the mainstream of things in like years. I wouldn't know if that's still how people go about reading things or whatever. Like, is like wokeness, as it were, still a thing?
Man, I mean, I feel like probably. It feels like I hear people talking about that still.
Yeah.
But I don't. Yeah, I don't know if it's the same.
It's probably just like a hangover conversation. I feel like everyone I know is kind of like, okay, well that whole era was kind of stupid. Everyone went crazy about Trump, and like we allowed the wrong end of cultural studies to influence damn near everything.
Yeah.
I imagine it is still mainstream. I don't know. I'm not. I live in my own bubble now, so I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But anyways, I was very like, yeah, that got to my head for sure.
So,
Oh, and for the record, like I'm not innocent there. Like I've been on both sides of that very aggressively when I come out talking shit about wokeness and all that. So
no, yeah. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
definitely an interesting sort of line to walk or like
Yeah.
a thing to balance, kind of that, like being aware, but also putting your own, because you can only write from your own perspective, and people, like obviously there's facts and there's not
Yeah.
facts, but your own perspective, people might agree or disagree and
Yeah.
and take their own opinions and things, and
Yeah.
it's definitely an interesting line to walk.
Well, that's what's one thing that I also thought about was like, this is legitimately like a minority condition, and like that's not really a controversial thing to say because like mental illness has been ostracized and stigmatized in like damn near every civilization for centuries. And I don't know. During that same time period, there was like a genuine. There was kind of like a what's the word I'm looking for? There was a type of anti-racism and feminism and queer thought that was on the rise, much of which was great and beautiful, but the type of thinking that was going around there, which I think this book is generally aligned with, was all more or less like directly antagonistic towards white men as like the ultimate like barrier to other people's freedom. And so it was just like I thought to myself that like mental illness wasn't a part of the party, by the way. There wasn't much of a theory of like saneism, discrimination against people with mental health conditions or alternate states of mind or whatever. Could a white man actually introduce like a case for like a social movement against discrimination from the lived experience perspective to a crowd like that? Or would they just be like, we've already had white men doing too much of everything? One of many reasons why actually I did a reverse J.K. Rowling here. Yeah. It's, out of curiosity, do you see like a man or a woman in that picture?
I could see it be both, honestly.
What was like your gut reaction there?
I think there are aspects of the person that could be sort of like feminine, but there are aspects that could be masculine. I guess I didn't really register man or woman. I just kind of saw person.
Sure.
But I also might not have the same like views on like gender that like other people do.
There are no clear-cut views on gender.
Yeah. So I don't know. It just like that's a human being.
Yeah. Well, that's also like the other frustrating thing. It's like I feel like there's like we're in a moment where like the concept of gender is simultaneously being abolished while people also still hold categories of men and women to be very sacred. And I anticipated that authors would get a lot of shit for whatever gender shortcoming they might have. However, if you satisfy one crew, the other's going to hate you. And if you satisfy the other crew, the other's going to hate you. And again, maybe I'm being oversensitive, but I do think that, like, if you're a rookie millennial author, you have to expect that that's how the audience is going to see you, and that's the line of analysis they're going to take. And frankly speaking, yeah, I have had a bit of harassment coming from the gender type line. Yeah.
So you asked me about the cover of the book.
Yeah.
What was your intention with the cover of the book?
Kind of what you said.
Yeah.
I don't want to be too clear cut.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Is the person, like the character, the main character, is their gender ever addressed or described?
It's addressed. It's she, her.
Mm.
I wouldn't say Boo as a woman is a huge part of her character. That gets lost on some people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So the book is, you put a lot of yourself in it. It's a very personal thing. How much is like this sort of political narration, and how much is your own personal like experience, would you say?
Probably like, it's actually a good question. Probably like 70% personal experience and then 30% just manifesto ranting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How does it feel putting that sort of information out there? Like it's serious, it's kind of heavy, it's probably in some ways maybe a little bit painful. Yeah. How does that feel that people can pick it up and read it?
I'm beyond that now. I mean, I haven't even read this in like 6 years, and I don't really have intentions of doing so again. 90% of it I might not even write again. I'm not the same person. My views have changed. I've actually, for the first time in my life, been kind of like happy and healthy. Like, I'm not exactly on the same spectrum that Boo is. I don't have qualms about it. I actually feel kind of empowered because, it feels like I can take a position of leadership and engage earnestly with people on something that increasingly most people are kind of desperate to engage with.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that feels good. I mean, it's yeah.
So you haven't written for a minute, it sounds like, is what you said earlier.
I've been slowly working through like another novel that's of a totally different premise. But yeah, I haven't worked on that in a minute. Yeah.
Well, I was going to ask you, it sounds like this is kind of a standalone sort of piece that you've written. What would you do next, or what are you working on next?
I was trying to do something that was like more conventionally literary. Like when I wrote this, like it is a novel and it is literary fiction. It has plot and characterizations and all that, but like I was strictly thinking about like its functions as like advocacy or even as like a nonfiction piece. I did not give two shits about literary theory or how to properly develop plot or anything that's like a conventional literary thing. So I've put the political parts aside and I've kind of tried to dive into things that I didn't, that actually a proper writer would know, like, reading the classics, having a sense of what all those things are about, and thinking more about the technical fine prints of crafting a novel. It's been very slow moving, but I'm at like 45 to 50,000 words, where it should probably rest between like 60 and 80,000.
Wow.
And that's of a first draft, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there's somebody watching and they're curious about writing or doing what you've done, would you have any like words of advice for them about the process? Any part of it?
Well, I haven't really succeeded yet, so who am I to give advice? But
you've done it though. You have succeeded
in
its
a book, but like it's not a book that like people know or like talk about. It's cliche, but like just persevere. I mean, my mindset was like 99% of people aren't going to write a book. So if you're going to bother to do it, you're already like, the odds are already against you. And then 99% of people who start a book aren't going to finish it. Odds still against you. 99% of people who write one and pitch to an agent aren't going to get one, et cetera, et cetera. And you can go through all of that and like, the odds are going to be against you every single way, unless you're like a public figure or a social media influencer or someone who already has clout to make like you as an author marketable. So I just say like, write something that you feel you would really want to read yourself but can't find, and make it a product that is just so solid and so exciting to you and to other people that like, irrespective of any other critical judgments, someone else would pick it up and be like, yeah, I'm really about this.
Yeah.
So just, yeah. And also don't let the business of books get you down. I did that sometimes. To share a story, there was a woman at my book club who said she saw an author at an event from Women and Children's First. That author also happens to run a bookstore herself. And she said something to the effect of like, oh, like we get like, 100 new books per week, and we have to be pretty discerning about what we take. And I can usually read a page of a book and understand if it's good literature or not, which is nonsense.
Yeah.
I mean, like I trust like her craft is so much more developed than I am, and she does have an eye for like what is good, but there's no way you can know from one page out of several hundred if it's actually a quality book any more than you could talk to someone for 30 seconds and know their life story.
Yeah.
So, and I don't have any particular insight into what New York agencies do, but from what I can gather, there's just a massive pile of things that are being submitted, and the process goes in much the same way. Like either you've made a very compelling pitch and they'll pull it out and be like, okay, I'll actually look at this. But for the most part, I don't think people who submit to big agencies are getting the light of day that their lives and their work deserves. So don't let their judgments, deter you from doing whatever it is you got to do to get your readers.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like sometimes, I don't know if it's necessarily true for writers, but it likely is. I feel like that sometimes, even a master might not be popular during, like immediately or even during their time, but something can take off if like, the audience is out there. It just has to be found.
Right. And like that is a salve to people who get rejected. Like on one hand, just because you didn't make it doesn't mean you don't suck. Maybe you do suck, but
Maybe.
yeah, no. The list of authors who are like, it's somehow obscure or rejected, or just there's a gazillion of them. Yeah, Cormac McCarthy just died, and I read a profile of him in the New York Times, and I guess his first manuscript was just like a very poorly edited, written with spelling errors, screed that nobody wanted. And then he became maybe like the biggest American writer of his generation. I mean, I'm not going to make a claim that's superlative, but like, it was a big deal. It was a big deal, yeah.
Yeah.
And, James Joyce was obscure. I think he only had a small band of like anarchist feminists who really supported his work. And yeah, to your point.
Do you know anyone who's read it?
Yeah.
How do people feel? What are they saying?
I would say it's, I think they think it's very powerful. I'm lucky to know the people who really liked it. On Goodreads, that's a pretty nasty website. I've seen some harsher takes, but I think people have strong reactions to it, and I was intending to provoke mixed between very, very high praise. Actually, one of the back quotes on here is, quote, a great Chicago novel from the Chicago Reader. And then also just like, what is this screed and why it's so miserable and aggressive? Like, why would anybody read this, let alone write it? Which is great. I think I like the polarized reactions. I think that's a good thing.
I was gonna say, I feel like that's important.
Yeah.
If you wrote a book on mental health and there weren't people that were a little bit upset, then it seems like it maybe, like, I think it's good that there's some movement, of making people think, kind of like confronting certain things. Yeah. I think that's good.
Should be grateful for the haters. People don't recognize that enough.
Yeah.
Be grateful for the haters.
And honestly, like, what are they, like, the whole quote that's like, even like negative, like, publicity can be like good publicity just because people are talking about it,
Yeah,
kind of.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I don't know if I mean, it is what it is. I've stopped Googling my own name to see if it shows up anywhere. I don't think you should let things written on the internet get to your head.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've heard about like professional athletes who will actually like go on Twitter and like read like what armchair analysts are saying about that game, and they actually allow these people to influence how they think of their own game, and of course it ruins it. And that's probably no different for anything else. Like, who am I to just hand up authority to strangers on the internet who want me to write a certain way or think the book should be a certain way? It'll only mess with my head and undermine my confidence. Yeah.
So I think we have probably about time for like one more question. I guess the thing that I want to know is, this book, you've created it, where you kind of like let it go out into the ether.
Yeah.
Where do you want it to go, I guess? Do you want to eventually maybe like take it nationally? What's the next step for this book in particular?
I think books are babies. You just create it and you can't dictate its life.
It's just gonna go
It's
out
going
into
to
the
have
world.
its own life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. I'll do my part to get it out there. And if, cool offers came along, I would definitely consider them. But I'm really liking my, life in the North Side right now, going to bookstores and doing events like this. I should actually plug a couple things.
Please.
First event was at a studio called Press Here, the Center for Mad Culture, which is like a Mad Pride artist studio and research library located at the Fine Arts Building at 410 South Michigan. It's run by an artist named Matt Baudet. It might be the only Mad Pride Cultural Center in the States right now that we know of, but in keeping with everything I've talked about, Mad Pride is kind of exactly what you'd expect it to be. It's partly like rebuking any negative connotations that one might hold about madness or mental illness, making a social, cultural identity out of it, and trying to think of yourself outside of a box that's restricted by maybe medical terms or paternalism or stigma or anything like that. So go check him out because he's got a million books there that are a lot like this and can help you with whatever. And May is Mental Health Month, and him and I are planning 4 weekends worth of events. Ideally, we do one on kind of the history of Mad Pride, one on like advocacy and activism, one on kind of like the cultural identity components, and then one on art and aesthetics. So that's May. Follow me on Instagram at MVPairBooks. You can also follow Press Here. But we're gonna try to make a thing out of that. Anybody who wants to come is welcome.
Heck yeah.
So yeah.
Cool. So y'all know what to read next.
Yeah. Do.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Matt, for being on the show. We really appreciate your time and what you've had to say.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. All right, guys, that concludes episode 2 of season 4. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.